everyone, my name is Ryan Cam, and welcome back to the 1999 Project, where I'm going to try and fail to review every movie from the year 1999. This week is a fun week for this project because all of the movies I'm covering are really good. Let's just say that, with one being one of my all-time favorite Disney movies, and I'm going to have a guest on with me to talk about that. But before we jump in, if you like this video, leave a like, subscribe, click the bell for notifications. You know the drill. With that out of the way, let's get started. Starting off with a parody of one of my all-time favorite characters, and a surprisingly funny parody at that. It's Austin Powers, the spy who shagged me.
Austin Powers, the spy who shagged me.
Great plan, Einstein. All right, zip it.
Austin Powers, The Spy Who Shagged Me was directed by Jay Roach, the man behind all of the Austin Powers movies, as well as movies such as Bombshell, The Campaign, and Dinner for Schmucks, among others. And it starred Mike Myers as Austin Powers, International Man of Mystery. This movie is basically a parody of the Sean Connery, Roger Moore, James Bond era of films. Austin Powers is back, and this time around he is challenged by his nemesis, Dr. Evil. But this time, Dr. Evil is rigging the game a bit. He sends his hired assassin, Fat Bastard, that is his name, to find the freeze-dried Austin Powers and take his mojo. Basically, Austin Powers can no longer rise to the occasion. And I don't mean stand up. And so Austin Powers must travel back in time to the 60s to find and regain his mojo. I'll admit that I have never seen the original Austin Powers, so I went into this movie not really knowing what to expect. I didn't know if I had to have seen the first Austin Powers to get it. I wasn't entirely sure of what they were going for, but I did know one thing, that I love me some James Bond, and especially in this era, the James Bond movies were pretty ripe for being made fun of, especially a couple of years later with Die Another Day, but that's a whole nother story for a whole nother time. I'm happy to report that I loved this movie. It's not perfect. There's definitely some jokes that I wasn't a fan of personally or were repetitive, but overall, this movie this made me laugh so hard. The movie follows a weird comedy tradition in the 90s where comedic actors play multiple versions of themselves. In The Spy Who Shagged Me, Mike Myers plays Austin Powers, Dr. Evil, and Fat Bastard, and I'm sure he did a couple more that I am missing. But Mike Myers really over-delivered on this one. I loved Austin Powers. I loved how he's basically a send-up of the Connery and Roger Moore era James Bond characters and how ridiculous they are in certain aspects, especially involving women. One of my favorite parts of the whole movie is the beginning, in which Austin Powers is completely naked and he's dancing through this hotel lobby while the opening credits are playing, and the credits are done in a way to where it hides his little Austin Powers, like the opening of the Simpsons movie. It made me laugh quite a bit. There's also these little in-jokes, especially one where there's some Jewish people there, and I'm sure you can put two and two together from there. Dr. Evil is just phenomenal. I love how over the top, and how silly he is. Literally, the first scene that we see him in is on the Jerry Springer show. This movie understood its assignment. Really, it's such a 90s time capsule that I just couldn't help but laugh at, the insanity of Jerry Springer and just all these other 90s related things popping up. Dr. Evil has a son named Scott Evil, played by Seth Green, who basically just craps on everything that his father does. Like Dr. Evil has a plan of putting a laser on the moon and calling it a Death Star, and Scott Green's like, nice plan, Vader. I love the dynamic between Seth Green and Mike Myers as Dr. Evil. It's so funny. And then Dr. Evil just completely craps on Scott Evil but loves this little mini-me clone that he gets about 15-ish minutes into the movie, played by the late Vern Troyer, rest in peace. I think the biggest weakness of the movie is some of the jokes go a bit too long. Like, basically, they go too long in certain spots, and then there are instances where jokes just repeat a lot. A good 50 to 60% of the jokes in this movie are dick jokes. Like, blatant dick references, dick puns, like dick jokes. Hell, the main premise of the movie is basically Austin Powers trying to get his libido back because I guess Viagra didn't exist in the 60s. There's also innuendo abound. Like there's a scene in which the mini-me and Austin Powers are fighting, and mini-me bites Austin Powers' little powers, and I was just like, what, why is this happening? What is going on? Like I wasn't laughing, I was just like, what are we even doing here? And he gets rid of the mini-me kind of alien, like the ending of Alien style, except like the mini-me gets into Austin Powers' suit and he basically has to get him out of the airlock, and he sits there and starts reading the newspaper like he's taking a dump. It's funny at first, but then like when they go back to the same well of, oh, he's getting hit in the junk again, like it just got old. But I'm not going to say that I'm made out of stone because I am not. There is a lot going on in this movie, and most of it is really funny. You see the younger version of Dr. Evil's henchman, played by Rob Lowe, who is basically the villain from Thunderball, even down to the eye patch. Dr. Evil and Number One from Russia with Love have a workplace romance, and it involves a sex scene. Yes, really. This is just one of those movies that just takes its silly premise and just runs with it. And so I'm going to give it a great rating. It's not perfect, like I said. There's definitely stuff that either A, doesn't age well, or B, just repeats itself for the sake of stretching it to 90 minutes. But overall, this movie was a great time. Also, side note, the character of Fat Bastard in this movie is pretty much Shrek. Like a live action version of Shrek. If you close your eyes and you hear Mike Myers speak in the Scottish accent, it's pretty much Shrek. All he needs to do is wax poetically about onions, and that's Shrek right there. Funny enough, Shrek, the first one, would come out 2 years after this movie. I don't think that's a coincidence. But now let's keep it going with a comedy and talking about a movie that honestly I did not expect much from. I didn't even see a trailer for it, and it turned out to be fascinatingly brilliant. It's called Jackie's Back.
Jackie's back.
Jackie's back.
Jackie's Back was directed by Robert Townsend, and it stars a lot of people. But the main players are Jennifer Wright, Tim Curry, Whoopi Goldberg, David Hyde Pierce in one scene, and many, many, many others. This movie is a Christopher Guest, This Is Spinal Tap style mockumentary about a singer named Jackie Washington. In the 70s, she was basically a hybrid of Tina Turner and Whitney Houston, even though they are both name dropped in the movie. But after numerous scandals, including but not limited to her maybe or maybe not stabbing her first husband in the head with an afro pick, yes, really, and selling makeup products that are made from pickle juice, yes, really, she has had her reputation torn to shreds, and this documentary is going to be her comeback. And her documentary is made and narrated by a British TV host played by Tim Curry. Yes, the Tim Curry you're thinking of. This was a made-for-television movie, and it was made for television on the Lifetime network. Yes, the Lifetime network that you're thinking of. It shocked me to see that this was a Lifetime movie. I was like, what? But other than the fact that this was made for Lifetime, I cannot find anything about this movie whatsoever. Like, how did they fund it? How did they manage to get cameos from all these celebs? Like, what happened here? Why has this movie is just sitting on Tubi collecting dust? Because it's low-key really funny. It's basically Pop Star Never Stop Never Stopping, but for a 70 late mid to late 70s Whitney Houston, Tina Turner hybrid like pop diva, something like that. Jennifer Wright is great in this movie. I was thinking of where I saw her from because I know I had seen her somewhere, and it turns out number one, she's one of the backup dancers at the Moonlight Lounge in Sister Act, and she plays one of Aunt Viv's sisters in The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air.
That does it. I'm getting me a white man.
And she is really great here. She was nominated for an NAACP Image Award for this, which is funny because her character actually won an NAACP Image Award. That's just funny to me, weirdly. Tim Curry is like bacon. You add him to anything, and he automatically makes something better. And that goes double for this movie. He plays the pretentious British TV host, and he just plays it to a T. He's through a very thinly veiled amount of contempt for this person. And the genius of this movie is that you slowly start to see that maybe this woman is not exactly the best person to be making a comeback. You see her scandals, you see her ups, you see all of her downs, and it's all done pretty efficiently. This movie is about 90 minutes. She has a daughter named Shaniqua who pretty much hates her. She has a sister played by Whoopi Goldberg, which just took me completely out of nowhere. That's a Sister Act reunion that I did not anticipate. Some of the celebrity cameos include, and I'm going to read off the names so I don't get them wrong, Don Cornelius of Soul Train, Melissa Etheridge, Kathy Griffin, Ricky Lake, Howie Mandel with hair no less, director Penny Marshall, rest in peace, Bette Midler, Liza Minnelli, Rosie O'Donnell, Dolly Parton, and Chris Rock. They all make these talking head style like interviews, and it's so surreal that a movie on the Lifetime network could afford to hire these people for like these brief talking head segments. This movie is just crazy. What's even crazier is the backstory behind Jennifer Wright. She had several romantic relationships with whom include Christopher Walken, like the very same Chris Walken that you're thinking of, and Howie Mandel. Like, wow. This is a mockumentary, which means it's also technically found footage, so your mileage is going to vary. But this is very much cut from the mold of a Christopher Guest, Waiting for Guffman, A Mighty Wind, Best in Show, that kind of movie. If that's a movie for you, then I can't recommend this enough. My one lone gripe with the movie is the way it handles time. It jumps around quite a bit, and I feel like if it was more streamlined, I think it would have been a little more efficient, I guess. I'm going to give this movie a great rating. I was almost going to go amazing, but because of the weird things with time, I had to knock it down a bit of a peg. But regardless, it is an incredibly funny movie. It's severely underrated. Go check it out. It's on Tubi. Watch it right now. Well, after you're done with this video. But let's close things out with one of my favorite Disney movies and maybe one of my all-time favorite movies, period. It's Tarzan. Tarzan was directed by Kevin Lima and Chris Buck. Yes, this is a VHS. And this was released by Disney at the height of their powers in terms of mainline animated canon. It tells the story of a boy who is named Tarzan. He loses his parents in a shipwreck and is adopted by this tribe of apes in the jungle. Meanwhile, a group of Englishmen, along with Jane, visit on an expedition, and Tarzan and Jane meet. But before I get into my thoughts on the movie, I want to turn it over to my Life in the Movies podcast co-host, the great and powerful Jacob Martin. Jacob, take it away.
Thank you, Ryan, for having me on your channel once again. It's good to be part of your 1999 project. And when looking at your list of movies that you had to cover for this remarkable year of movies, I was like, I gotta do one of these. So I appreciate you for having me on to talk about one of my favorite Disney movies of all time, Tarzan, released in 1999, the final animated movie released during my favorite era of the Disney canon, the Disney Renaissance. Tarzan, of course, is based on the source material of the same name. We all know the story of Tarzan, a human raised by gorillas, and then he meets Jane, and then he has to decide whether he wants to stay with the apes or go with Jane to London. This is a wonderful animated movie, beautifully animated. Oh my goodness, the 2D animation in here is off the charts. Like how lush and crisp everything is. And then you got cutting edge CGI blended in with the 2D animation. This is some of the highest peak of animation that Disney has ever done. And it still looks beautiful to this day. Some brilliant touches were made with the mythos of Tarzan, especially the way we all know Tarzan swings on the vines and in order to go from place to place. But to make it look even cooler, they decided to have Tarzan surf the tree branches, which I don't think you can pull that off in live action, but in animation they were able to pull this off, and it was amazing to watch unfold. I love this movie visually. Story-wise, I think, I'm not an expert on Tarzan. I've not read the source material. I only watched this movie, and I watched this newer movie that Warner Brothers made several years ago, The Legend of Tarzan. That movie's trash, by the way. This movie does a great job with Tarzan. You really get to feel the conflict he has throughout this entire movie, where, yeah, he's this goofy-looking guy swinging around on a loincloth, but, he's got a heart, too. He has he's been raised by gorillas, and then he meets Jane, and he sees his own kind for the first time in years, and he's like, well, where do I belong? That's pretty much the core conflict of the story, and yeah, and you really feel for him, and it's a hard decision that he has to make, and it gets really emotional at times, and that's what makes this film such a gripping watch, because you really get to see the conflict in there, and even with his ape father, Kerchak, who never really had respect for him, because, he doesn't really like people outside of his own kind. He's, a little bit prejudiced in that regard, and then Tarzan has to struggle to find respect with him, and that leads to some really powerful moments at the end of the film. I love the dynamic of Tarzan and Jane. One of my favorite relationships in any Disney film. Might be in my top 5 as far as romances go in a Disney movie, because they have great chemistry together. And like just from seeing one, it's like, all right, you see why they belong to each other when you watch the two characters interact. Phil Collins. I gotta talk about Phil Collins. The Phil Collins soundtrack in this movie. Wow. I think this might have been my introduction to Phil Collins as a kid. The soundtrack that he provided this movie, because man, he provided some excellent songs in this movie. And I've heard some people say, he's singing over the emotions of the characters and that's distracting. I can see where they're coming from. If you don't like the music, that's perfectly fine. But my personal opinion, it never distracted me. I think these songs complement the movie well, summing up the feelings of the characters. He is an incredible singer and a gifted drummer. So it's great seeing those talents on display in these remarkable songs. You'll Be in My Heart, beautiful ballad. You got Son of Man, which is epic. Two Worlds, a great way to open the film. Trash in the Camp is a delight to listen to. And then, of course, you got Strangers Like Me, which is a great character piece. So just some excellent songs in this movie. I can see why this would kind of fall under people's radars as far as the Disney Renaissance goes, because there's so many movies in this era. People love The Little Mermaid and The Lion King, Aladdin, Beauty and the Beast. Those are tend to be the 4 best movies in this era. And so some of these tend to get a little lost in the shuffle, but this is one of my personal favorite films in the Renaissance era. And I can see why, some people don't like this one as much. They think, oh, Rosie O'Donnell's annoying as Turk. And I'm like, I get that. She's not my favorite actress either, but I actually don't mind her in this role. I think she's actually really funny as this character, and I never was annoyed by the Turk character. Some people don't like the villain that much. Yeah, I will say, if I had watched this with adult eyes for the first time, I would see the twist that Clayton was the villain from a mile away. But as a kid, I didn't know better, so I was kind of shocked. Oh no, he's the big bad guy all along. He wanted to capture the gorillas for profit. But you know what? I don't mind Clayton as a villain. Yeah, obviously we know he's the villain, but when he is the villain, he is pretty intense to watch. It's crazy. He's voiced by the same actor who was Boss Nass, the Gungan leader, the Phantom Menace, and he's a more intense character in this movie. Has one of the most brutal deaths in any Disney movies too. Like, oh, him accidentally hanging himself. Yeah, Disney couldn't get away with that nowadays. They're too sensitive now. Yeah, some aspects of this movie. You even see Tarzan's corpses at the beginning of this movie. You see, like, their dead corpses. They were devoured by that cheetah. No, leopard. I mean, not a cheetah, a leopard. And you see, like, the blood prints. I'm like, oh man, this got a G rating. Wow. Yeah, I love this movie. This is in my top 5 in the Disney Renaissance. I think this is a fantastic movie. I love the story. The Tarzan and Jane's relationship's done really well. The animation's beautiful. The Phil Collins songs are amazing. Just all around an excellent Disney movie. Easily one of the best movies in 1999 as far as I'm concerned. Probably my favorite animated movie of 1999, not 89. You got this and Toy Story 2 and The Iron Giant are like the big 3 that year. I think Tarzan's my personal favorite out of the bunch. I love the storytelling especially, and you can't go wrong with the Phil Collins soundtrack. So, excellent movie. 5 out of 5 stars. Awesome. One of the highlights of the Disney Renaissance. And thank you again, Ryan, for having me on your channel once again to talk about Tarzan. I'm sure I'll leave links in the description below where you can check out my channel. But I know long-time Ryan Can viewers, you know who I am. I'm the co-host of the Life in the Movies podcast, and we've done collabs all throughout. I even do the Discussing DreamWorks that Ryan's a co-host on. It's been a lot of fun getting to know Ryan over the years, and I hope we can do more collabs in the future. So thank you, Ryan, for having me. Back to your thoughts on this awesome movie.
As Jacob talked about, this movie basically was the last released in the Disney Renaissance. And if you're watching this video, then I don't think I need to talk to you about what the Disney Renaissance was. I can best describe it as Disney at the very height of their powers. From the late 80s to the late 90s, in terms of animation, they were unstoppable. They went through a rough patch in the 60s and 70s and even into the 80s. One of my favorite stories that Rachel from Rachel's Reviews would always tell me is about how, as Jodie Benson was recording her lines for Little Mermaid, they were literally packing up the Disney studios in Burbank, California. It was a bad time to be a Disney employee, but thanks to movies like Little Mermaid, everything started to turn around. Creatively, Disney were unmatched. They were releasing not only great animated stuff, but also live action stuff. They had Touchstone clicking on all cylinders. From late 80s to the early 2000s, Disney was untouchable in terms of family entertainment, and Tarzan is a prime example of this. I will yield in certain aspects to say that Tarzan is inferior to some of the better Disney Renaissance movies. I can understand that. If you like Lion King more, I totally get it. If you like Little Mermaid more, I also understand that logic too. Tarzan is awesome. It's one of my favorite Disney movies of all time. I can watch it any day of the week and not get bored. As Jacob touched on, the animation is absolutely stunning. It's hand-drawn, it's absolutely gorgeous, it has aged like a fine wine. You can't beat 2D hand-drawn animation. You just can't. You look at it and you just go, this is a work of art, man. For a movie that is 88 minutes long, they tell a lot of story, and they just tell it with, sometimes with just looks, like people looking at each other. The Mad Max Fury Road version of storytelling, if you will. And as Jacob talked about, the soundtrack in this movie is absolutely a banger, like across the board. Phil Collins over-delivered on this one. You know the meme that has been circling of Disney executives saying, all right, Phil, It's just a soundtrack for our Talking Ape movie. It doesn't have to be that serious. And then he turns in bangers like Strangers Like Me, Two Worlds, The Trash in the Camp. It's just I could just go on, but it's a beautiful movie with great music, beautiful animation, a hell of a love story. It's dark too. The movie starts with the shipwreck where Tarzan loses his parents, and it ends with the villain of the movie, Clayton, being hung by a vine, and you see his dead body in shadow. Late 90s Disney did not play around. You know the drill. This is getting an amazing grade. If somehow you have never seen this movie, see it. It is one of Disney's very best, in my opinion. What did you all think of any of these movies? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to read what you have to say. Thank you to Jacob Martin for joining me on the Tarzan portion of this video. And next week on the project, I'm going to be covering movies such as The General's Daughter, and I'm going to be joined by a first-time guest to review Big Daddy, starring Adam Sandler. But my name is Ryan Cam, and I'll see you in the next one.